Para cerrar,
In closing in today's forum, it's an honor to be able to introduce three colleagues and friends to me here in Panama and in Chile. Senator Jorge Pizarro, if you could please come up, sir. President of the Parlatino, Senator in Chile, Mr. Severino Mejía. Mr. Severino Mejía, for those of you that know him, for me it's one of those persons that understand in a comprehensive manner security issues with a people-centered approach. Welcome, Mr. Severino. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Jorge Villalba, who is a sub-director of the Financial Investigation Unit of Panama. It's an honor to have all three of you here. So we will talk about the regional security perspectives in regards to what's happening with security at a regional level. And I really like that we can have see a broad stroke, not only money laundering with the FIU of Panama in a very strategic country for the region, which is Panama, and on the other hand, we could have the parliamentary vision from the president or the chair of Parlatino, how we can work on the different model laws, how Parlatino is able to support harmonizing legislations in Latin America and the Caribbean, something that's very important that we need to work on. And also the comprehensive and holistic vision of Mr. Severino Mejia from Panama. With a vision, because I think Severino has such broad vision because he comes from the academic world, but also from the private and public force, and he's worked on both of them. So, Senator Pizarro, the floor is yours.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. To the dearest colleagues in the panel, I think Alejo gave us a really good introduction as to anyone's opinion for the regional perspectives of security for Latin America and the Caribbean. I would also like to recognize how rich this debate has been with the interventions in all the different panels, focusing from different aspects the challenges that we now have globally with the current health situation, political situation, and social and economic situation that our different countries are now going through. Globalization, as it has already been mentioned, in the 1990s had an economic character and in a positive approach it was able to make changes in technology, social, political arena, and also from the environmental point of view. And this is something that started to change the way in which the structure of the states, countries, and nations worked, but also society, people. Sp- and democracy, liberty, and expanding the rights of people. So, this globalization today is showing how effective it has been, but in the worst manner. Because now that we have a health emergency, coronavirus, COVID 19, and the very dramatic effects that is generated in each and every one of our countries. So, now when I talk about globalization and the way it has affected the health, political, economic, and social arena. And if we think about what the Latin America society should think about in regards to its future, a future that would allow us to have a perspective in regards to security in the broadest sense of the word. The very first conclusion we should arrive at is that any strategy that we could think of for the next years needs to be able to address in a very efficient manner the health emergency. Dearest friends and colleagues, this is something that we are not doing correctly. Now, if we think of May of last year, March, April, when we started to make the very first decisions, right at this Parlatino with the representatives of all the countries, we thought that the pandemic was something that would be controlled, or rather overcome, in a period of 6 to 8 months. In this year, the world and the region have started another phase. We're halfway through the year, and the truth is that nobody can say for sure how much longer it will take before we have safety, peace, and strategies that can be implemented that are not conditioned by the health problems. If we talk about security, the very first thing that we need to talk about is to think about the security of people from, just like we mentioned, this from a political point of view in the morning. We've talked about all sorts of security, cybercrime, and how we're able to adapt to new technologies, how we're able to avoid or work collectively to be able to fight organized crime, money laundering, abuse, illicit trade, and many other points. But from the political point of view, in a political forum such as this, as the Parlatino or any other, from the executive level, the priority should always be the people. People. If our priority is not focused on people, what we're doing is making a situation worse. In this health crisis that have had economic and social effects. This morning, we talked about the security of people, which is related to their daily lives, which is related to the certainty of the person being able to go to work and a certainty that they know that we will be able to get to work because there's a public transportation system that would allow them to get to work with peace of mind. But for that, they need to have a job. And that is not a guarantee certainty today due to the economic crisis we're suffering today. The person needs to have the peace of mind that they will be able to have mobility and transit through the streets. They will be able to go back home and their home would not suffer due to criminal activity or that their life would not be marked due to the collusion in the economic arena where consumers or people have to simply accept what very specific economic powers decide through collusion and abuse. That democracy in the public system needs to be able to guarantee individual liberties, freedom of mobility, to be able to guarantee freedom of democratic expression, even if there are restrictions in the rights of people. And this is a task and responsibility of the democratic systems, responsibility of Congress and executive branch, and the responsibility of citizens. In our Latin America, we have an example for every flavor as to how this emergency was handled. Unfortunately, we have very bad examples in regards to corruption, abuse, arbitrary acts, and even the corruption of those that thought that they were using the few vaccines that they could have. They were only providing it to those that were closest to them or those that use very scarce resources within our countries for their own benefits. When we talk about security, it means having a strategy for our region. And I think it needs to change the way in which we think of the role that states need to play, the role of authorities, Congress, and even the role that the academic world, the private sector, the judiciary, the police, and law enforcement, everything that the system should be able to guarantee to any citizen. So I go from the micro to the macro. In the Parlatino, we've had so many forums and assessment meetings to be able to generate a coordinated behavior on behalf of the states. Coordination from the governments, coordination of international organizations, coordination of parliaments at a national and regional level. And I think we have failed at that. Today in Latin America, there is no multilateral integration that allows the coordinated act of the executive branch. ECLAC does not exist. OAS is unable to implement action. Prosur, connoisseur, UNASUR, you can call it whatever you like. Multilateralism, which should be our main objective from our state and our executive branch, in practice does not exist because it does not work. Everything is left up in theory. So, from the question for the political perspective is, can we build a security strategy at a sub-region or region level for our future? Are we capable of guaranteeing our citizens that they will have the certainty for their people, family, development, work, and to be part of societies that guarantee their rights, democratic societies that their rights will always be guaranteed? The reality of Latin America and the different movements that we're having, regardless of ideology, are no longer guaranteeing any of those points. We are not being efficient at this. I wanted to move away from the script of what this forum entails, but it's still our responsibility of those in the political arena to be able to represent and to ensure that everybody understands what millions of people are living through in every one of our countries without access to vaccines. And as long as they don't have access to vaccines, they will have more uncertainty. They are not concerned with the international global issues. They are concerned about their daily life. If we cannot overcome the health crisis, we cannot think of economic reactivation if we do not control the health crisis. It does not work. It has not worked in any country because it comes back to the same point, and we go back to restrictions. We're back to a state of emergency. We're going back to quarantines. We restrict people's rights, and that means complication of the economic activities. It means unemployment. It means greater poverty. It means more hunger. And it means challenges for a future. And there's no other way to face this rather than in a coordinated manner. So I make a call to this forum that if we're going to talk about security and the challenges that we currently have in our countries, it should not only about in regards to crimes. We should understand that a strategic vision means that we are able to generate the conditions in a coordinated manner for the health crisis as international cooperation that can allow solidarity to allow the reactivation of economy to guarantee jobs for people, and those developed societies will have to give more, and those that are not in that position will need to establish criteria that allow us to act united. And we're not doing this. The Latin American Parliament has as a fundamental mandate to ensure multilateralism, to supervise the executive branch to ensure that they comply with the mandates that they've received through democracy by the citizens, to supervise that that is complied and the rights of people are guaranteed. Thank you very much.
Excelente.
Excellent. That was incredible what the senator said. It's true. putting people at the center of our agenda, at the center of our policies, is so important. With that, Mr. Mejía, we would like to hear from you. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to use this optimistic phrase which says that the last will be first. There was a time, a long period of time, when we started this conference and we were discussing these issues that we would talk about today. And I would like to start off by saying I am the coordinator for projects and security programs and defense for the presidency in Panama. And I would like to thank Robert Pettinger, the president of the forum for the Intelligence Security Forum. And also, I would like to thank Alejo Campos for giving me the opportunity to present a few different considerations and perspectives with you today. These are regional perspectives, but also global security perspectives, which are connected. And so I would like to focus specifically on regional threats during the pandemic, which is showing us, and I say this as an academic, as a researcher from the Institute of Criminology at the University of Panama. It is creating some really interesting, some very unique interactions, and it's teaching us important things. I would speculate that, and I say this, it is an opinion, that criminal organizations, cartels and others, have had to read The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin about how to adapt, how to evolve in this pandemic, which has had a huge impact on the economy. And so we're not just talking about reactivating, I really talk about rebuilding our construction, which has collapsed essentially at all levels because of this struggle we are facing. And I would say drug trafficking is one of the illegal activities that has the biggest impact on our region. And while it is true that there has been a slowdown in 2020 because of the closing of borders, for example, Panama and Colombia, that does not mean, however, that they have stopped planting and producing cocaine in Colombia. And we have discovered that now 240,000 hectares of the coke plant are being planted. And we can see how this production of that plant has been seized, just in enormous numbers, by Panama. At the beginning of January to the 30th of June, there were seizures of 30.4 tons of cocaine. In 2020, in that same period of time, 32.8 tons. And this year, 2021, in the same period of time, 63.4 tons of cocaine. That is double of what was seized before. Panama is one of the countries that has put forth most effort in seizures. This is an effort that we must all dedicate ourselves to, keeping in mind that drug trafficking and violence is a public health issue. And if it is not dealt with appropriately, it can cause a pandemic or epidemic, so to speak, in our consuming population. This allows us to to understand the relationship between cause and its production in our neighboring country, Colombia, and the seizures that we have been able to do. As you know, the final destination of these products is primarily the United States and Europe. And another threat that we must look at is the issue of migration. In Panama, for the last 13 years, there have been situations with non-traditional nationalities that are coming into our country. In the past, it was Cubans. Cubans came into our country usually by plane, but we started to realize that there were more Africans coming in from Somalia, Ethiopia, those coming in from Asia, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan. And this really alerted us. It really caught our attention. Without a doubt, this represents, today, it represents a social problem and an economic problem because of the requirement that we have to aid these migrants in a humanitarian way. This means a significant cost. And with the situation that we are going through at this time, it is difficult to provide appropriate attention to these migrants. We had a meeting recently because of a concern on behalf of the Panamanian state because of the presence of almost 10,000 migrants in Colombia waiting for the border to open so that they could flow into our territory. And the agreement was to develop quotas so that 500 of those migrants could cross. The problem is not just the humanitarian situation of these migrants. Of course, they're looking for a better life and they seek to achieve the American dream, right, in the United States. And in this sense, we also are concerned at the margin of being able to achieve these goals. We look at the security issue. We have seen this happen, that globally these experiences are reflected, and in our region they are reflected, and we understand that in these groups there are some lone wolves who take advantage of these migrants and the migrant situation to travel to the border of the United States. There are also people in these groups who are being exploited through human trafficking, and many times they are abandoned. These migrants travel through what is known as the Darien Gap, which is a very wild jungle area. And we have seen that 33% of these migrants are children, boys and girls. And many of these migrants die in the jungle. They are drowned, they are bitten by snakes, they get sick because there are many illnesses that are there in the jungle, in the Darien Gap. This shows the social problem that we must deal with here. We've talked a lot about cybercrime, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but we must remember that during the pandemic, there has been an exponential growth of cybercrime. Panama, for example, has experienced in 5 years 128% growth in cybercrime. Primarily looking at extortions and similar crimes like that, which are done by criminal organizations. And many of them have found this pandemic to be a golden opportunity. If we see that businesses have been profoundly affected by their commercial activities, and they seek to develop online sales, that has had repercussions on e-commerce, which has affected licit or legal commerce. As I highlighted in this conference, this is a very important situation. Our countries don't have experience or technical resources to receive assistance from, or so we need to receive assistance from countries that can give us the technical assistance to deal with this. It's not a threat just against Panama, just against the region. It's a global threat, and we need that technical assistance to face it. Also, I would like to highlight another issue of environment, which is something that is in the agenda. It is something that has significant impacts, and we must talk about it because of the devastating effects it has on our environment, especially in Panama. The Darien jungle is one of the few jungles left in America untouched, and we must maintain careful controls of any logging happening in that area. There's also gold mining, which affects our water resources, and the indigenous peoples who survive by fishing and in other ways are connected to our rivers. I had the opportunity, thanks to what my friend Alejo mentioned, to participate in Central America, El Salvador, and Guatemala, talking about this issue. And it is something that deserves our full attention. It's not just contrabanding ants. Now we're talking about contrabanding elephants. And now the fiscal seizures that we're looking at in the country are so significant. This is a health issue, and this affects health because we are looking at falsified medicines. We are looking at fake cigarettes. People believe that when they buy a cigarette, it's cheaper to buy it illegally, but they don't realize the problems with the quality of those cigarettes. That is a significant problem, which led to the closure of a Chinese company which was producing cigarettes, which were negatively affecting the health of our countrymen. So, as we face this problem, a country with a service economy, with a robust banking system, with the first free zone in the hemisphere, has put forth an immense amount of effort to create protocols and procedures in order to avoid our free zone being used as a platform for the development of contrabands and other issues like falsified medications. What other issues are important here as a country? The Minister of Security here today, Mr. Juan Pino, spoke with you about the issue of asset forfeiture. And I understand that he will be talking about that tomorrow. He's a big fan of that topic. Here in Panama, there are criminal organizations which capture a lot of assets, and we don't have necessarily norms that would give the resources to reorient them. Now we have a need for it, as we do have a need for health issues, for the vaccination issue, which we are progressing in very well in our country. On the other hand, dealing with the issue of drug trafficking, we seek to create an Air Navy Center for operations known as CROAN. This organization has developed a joint workforce with our institutions, the National Police, the National Border Patrol, the Air Navy, and the result has been seen in seizures. Today, another significant number of kilos of cocaine was seized. Panama is a transit country. And as a country with more than 12,000 kilometers of ocean, this is a challenge to capture and find these criminal actors. Many aspects of crime that occur in our countries come from criminal criminal organizations outside of our country, transnational organizations that have repercussions in Panama. And we are seeing some of that violence from these revenge killings and the territorial fights of these organizations. Finally, I would like to mention the work of all of our countries together, as we must consider that we cannot meet our goals working alone. We must join together to fight for our people. For this reason, I believe it is very important to put forth that effort, to put ourselves to work. I'm here to answer any questions or concerns that you might have. Thank you. Thank you very much, Severino Mejía. I never get tired of hearing you speak, and I always learn something when you share. Thank you for sharing that capacity that you have of always staying updated. I imagine you must not sleep. So to finish for today, we talked a bit about the regional aspects, we talked about security, we talked about money laundering throughout the region, and Panama has a protagonist role in this agenda. So for that reason, we would like to invite Mr. Jorge from the Financial Investigations Unit here in Panama. Hello, yes, afternoon to everyone. I know that we are in our closing minutes, so I will start out first of all by giving thanks to all of the organizers of this forum, those from the Parlatino and others, including the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum and their staff. There was a meeting that we had at a regional level with all of the different financial intelligence units in the region. And one way or another, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw either directly or indirectly that almost all of us were affected, especially the Panamanian Financial Intelligence Unit. But perhaps we were a bit prepared with a contingency plan. Quickly, I wouldn't want to use the word improvisation, but very quickly we needed to implement an action plan and develop our contingency plan as an FIU. Outside of that, the recess for that meeting, we were discussing some different topics, and most of the population, or most of the team for the FIU, that really forms the backbone of the group in terms of operations and technical analysis, most of them are young people. So we had to apply our biosecurity measures, and it was not easy at the beginning. We were not affected, or we had in fact been infected. In some units had developed COVID infections. And so now, at that point, our system was very organized. As you know, the national financial system continued operating. They only had to develop their own contingency plans as well. And their teams with which we communicate also continued functioning. They must still meet their requirements for reporting for all of the different transactions. You're aware of how those things work, I'm sure. So the FIU online continued operating. We only had to monitor from our homes. The system continued to operate. So we were supervising, looking at different requirements, operations reports, things that the financial sector was managing. I think that this was public as well, but in some media, despite the fact that it was a pandemic, 2020, the suspicious operation reports increased compared with previous years. Something that we could not explain, but it certainly happened. So we, as a financial investigation unit, we had to react. Number one, because we had to respond to the needs of the region. You know that there is an international information exchange process for intelligence exchange, but that is generally managed on site, with a platform on site, because of security issues. We could not use that system. It would be a risk to use it remotely, to access it remotely. So we had to basically assign a person. Some people continued to work remotely. They use some different terms in the public sector for it, but basically to work remotely. And the supervisors stayed on site, and little by little we started bringing in some units. So we really took advantage of the time during which the judiciary branch and the public ministry had suspended their activities. Also, the judiciary branch. And so we took advantage of that time to pick up all of the intelligence information that had been requested from other countries' FIUs. Crime doesn't stop. We were all facing a pandemic, but crime does not stop. We couldn't just sit at home and let the FIU system run on its own. There was more and more information coming in. So some of us were still on site, and little by little, we would start to join back in. And we were able to respond to the vast majority of the requirements needed by FIUs in other regions. And we were able to provide that technical assistance to the public ministry when they request information that they need from the FIU. You may have heard recently we talk about financial products, or the products that the FIU offers. And the public ministry, this is in law, it's a Law 23 in the executive decree, which handles the FIU, and it's in recommendation 29 of the FATF about the dissemination of information. What comes in with the suspicious activity report, as you know, our subjects provide those for analysis, and they require analysis. So we have a safe system installed where that information is managed, and they develop a financial information report where they believe there might be a money laundering case happening. Before the pandemic, there were work tables set up with the public ministry in order to determine timelines, transaction timelines, etc. And why do we do all of that? It's because, and you can correct me, doctor, but intelligence must be timely. Intelligence that is slow is not useful. Intelligence gets collected, it gets analyzed, it gets processed, and it must be used immediately. If we spend a lot of time looking at that information, or before we're able to look at it, then eventually maybe we get around to creating a report that we can send to the public ministry. But perhaps if there's a long delay as they get through that process, then the investigation phase has to start, and it's all too slow. So at the FIU, we have to understand these issues of time. We cannot give the public ministry this information when the dates are practically historic. So this investigation could collapse because it's no longer, or it's basically expired. In Panama, when we're talking about money laundering, it's 5 to 12 years to prosecute. And so we must be careful about our time to give sufficient time to the investigators to do their investigations and develop their processes. Our analysis team went through developing and processing all of these reports with financial intelligence and picking back up the public ministry work groups. It's not just about sending information. We sit down with the public ministry. We present the cases. We basically show a theory of what could possibly have happened, a potential money laundering case, so that they can begin an investigation. And that is how we use those suspicious activity reports. Now, just as the FIUs do, just as we must request information from other organizations like customs, or with the case that you mentioned about contraband, right? They have the right to request support, technical support from us. And so what do we mean by that? We offer them any information that they might need according to certain guides about what kind of information they can ask us for. Because we do have internal databases, but we also have open source information. We have closed sources of information. But everything related with financial instruments, financial tools, we have to request it from the organizations, and the financial organizations. And that takes time. There was a speaker who talked a bit about tax and tax evasion, and the use of technological tools to analyze this kind of information. Peter de la Cuesta from FBI spoke about this. He said this kind of analysis could take 30, 60, 90 days. But if we have a tool, then we can cut these timelines. And it can help for the analysis of future investigations. Exchanging information internationally, although, of course, everything that I'm talking about right now, it must go through a judiciary process as well. We only offer financial intelligence, graphs, traceability, theories that might be included in this economic crime. All of those must be proven in court by the public ministry. That is why it is so important to have that relationship between all of the different factors that are working. There are other organizations that participate, international organizations. As we've said, as we've talked about throughout the day, this is a transnational crime. It is maybe not just one crime, but perhaps one part of a series of crimes. In the case of technical assistance, that doesn't always come because of an SAR report. Perhaps a prosecutor comes and asks. There are actually about 5 prosecutors that ask for help most often, whether they are drug prosecutors. And I would say throughout the entire country, because they're not just in Panama City, they're in all of the different regions. So there's organized crime prosecutors. There are 2 different ones. One of them is specialized in money laundering. There are different kinds of prosecutors for fraud, depending on the crime that is being committed, and the anti-corruption prosecutor. Those are the ones who ask us for the most support in order to provide information that we have in our databases and to suggest other intelligence information. If we need to request international information, the prosecutor's office can request it, but they must still follow the judiciary process to do so. All of this information is intelligence information. It's not evidence. All of this information must be used for an investigative process. Our reports cannot actually be used in court. There must be a report from the money laundering organization or from the forensics group. So there are a lot of cogs that are working together, and they must be coordinated. Even more so when operations and investigations are happening at a regional level and many times at an international level. Perhaps the operation is happening locally, but it will affect many other countries in the region. So we must know what we're doing, what phase we're in, whether we're going to do a search, we're going to do a seizure, what effects could it have if there is an investigation and then we're going to take it to court. Do we have enough proof to actually process the crime? So those are the different phases we go through. Taking advantage of the moment in which the FIU is working not only locally but also internationally and contributing to the products that we can offer, not just to our local prosecutor's office, but also by providing assistance with the group, the Edmund Group, with other financial investigation units. If they request it from us, we can provide it. And so I'm really open here to hear any questions about our operations, about the technical work that we do, about how things are working during the pandemic, because that's certainly an interesting situation we've been dealing with. But as I say, crime does not stop, and we are still fighting crime. So I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you. All right, then, to start wrapping up our panel and our day, are there some questions? It looks like we do have a question there indeed. The gentleman back there first. Afternoon, Fabiola Valdez from the Financial Investigation Unit from Mexico. For Jorge Ballero, this is a very key question. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about the reactivation of the unit. We are considering this at this time, how we can avoid stopping our work during the pandemic, because certainly crime has not stopped. I would like to have the opportunity to talk with you more and have an exchange of best practices to hear about the experiences in Panama, in the FIU, and share some things in Mexico. We would be really interested to hear about the tools that you're using and how you've developed your work, and see if we can collaborate closely in order to hear some more expertise on these topics. I think that basically, it's the same kind of work, but perhaps we are using different tools or different reports. Certainly, we are at your service. I will offer you my card after we finish here. I'll just really quick respond to this. We are going to continue getting together in interagency groups, in task forces. As other speakers mentioned, we need to continue responding to the prosecutors. As I mentioned, there are many prosecutors who need our services. In this forum, there are going to be 40 different units, and we must continue with all of the different prosecutors that we work with. The main goal is that this information doesn't end up in a file in the FIU. It needs to be spread. It needs to be properly analyzed and managed, and that is the institutional objective that we have. There are other groups where I have participated, where we have had representatives from the FIU in Mexico, which is more investigative. We are more administrative here. But we will be looking at shifting that focus without losing our character as an administrative FIU. But we are at your service. We have participated with other organizations throughout the region. There are some that have participated, the Colombia FIU, Mexico, other countries too in the region. And so we're at your service. Thank you so much. Crime Stoppers has worked with FIU in a convention that was signed recently. That's one of the open sources of FIU to receive information about money laundering, and there's some excellent work happening there. We will continue doing some follow-up on the information that's being shared, but we're making a lot of progress. I'm going to ask you if you could make a really timely and relevant comment for the panel. Thank you very much. A very relevant question here. Mr. Severino Mejía, this is about how our freedoms were limited, including in our freedom to work during the pandemic. So how is it that 62.4 tons of cocaine were seized? I'm not sure if it was cocaine or the coke plant, compared with 2019. Why would you say that there was this significant increase between 2019 and 2021? Panama historically has been a transit zone. Many years back, the speedboats would not stop in our country because of the pressure of the Colombian army and its presence in international waters, the presence in international waters of the Coast Guard of the United States. There is a trend that has pushed those organizations to our coasts, and the Air Navy, with a specific Air Navy center called CRUAN, has been able to detect, together with the Navy and the Air Force in our country, is working out of this center, and we have developed a convention with the United States, an agreement that gives us technical support, including trainings, airplanes, and other equipment that allows us to move in this area, including the coordinated work that we've done with Costa Rica, with Mexico, with Colombia, with the United States. We are seeing extraordinary results. With the pandemic last year, there was a stop at the border. As the border opened, drugs started to move more. We see the speedboats coming in, and we've been able to capture them. I would like to say, Dr. Severino, what Dr. Severino mentioned, which I communicated to our colleague from the Mexico panel. You did a joint operation, I believe, Severino. It's Operation Orion, where the Financial Analysis Unit participated, not just the different FIUs and FAUs in financial intelligence operations, but also these tactical operations themselves, which Severino mentioned, which have been done with different groups. Every year, the Orion operation happens together with the Colombian Armed Forces, with Mexico, and with the United States, and the FIU Panama participates in that group as well. I would like to add to what Severino said. Citizen participation has been extraordinary. People are really realizing how much damage drug trafficking has had in their own communities, especially in the coast communities. And they are using tools like Crime Stoppers, who work directly with those communities. They find a way, a safe way, and a trustworthy way to report. No one wants a drug trafficking operation to happen in the same place where their children live. That's how simple it is. So as they see that risk for their families with the presence of the cartels and the drug traffickers in their areas, they would like to report. However, they are afraid to report. They don't want to go directly to the police, to the prosecutor's office. Everyone knows each other. These are very small towns. And so we find a way for them to anonymously report, and that information then gets to these task forces, and Severino mentioned one of them, and they're able to operationalize that information. I think that citizen participation is something that we must promote and strengthen in the region. People have so much information. They have 70% of all the information that we need, and they want to share it. Go right ahead. Thank you so much. My name is Victor Gonzalez. I am a representative of the Spanish Congress. Before I ask my question, I would like to say we support the Peruvian representatives, that we hope that there will be a fair electoral process. I have a document that shows that there are more than 3,000 examples where there were votes that were lost in the second round. It is statistically completely impossible. We ask for a fair electoral process, and without this concern of corruption. I would really like the panel to respond to this question from the Peruvian representative. My question was directly to Representative Mejía about the situation in Venezuela. You talked about 10,000 people wanting to cross the border into Panama. This reminds me of those who came from Morocco into Spain in only 24 hours. This is one of the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world in the last United Nations report, and number 1 in Africa. There are people in those 10,000 people that certainly come from Sudan, from Pakistan, and the level of poverty is at $1.40 a day. In Sudan, more than 45% live under that limit. Transiting from Sudan to the border of Colombia costs thousands of dollars. The only reason that happens is because they are financed. The only financer that can be doing that are the powers that desire to destabilize the democracies and the powers. Iran, for that reason, there are Lebanese soldiers fighting in Yemen. I don't know if you are aware of that situation. That's the first question. And number 2, how much does it cost for these citizens who come from the east coast of Africa to get here? Do you have any idea about how they're being financed? If they have promises of payment upon arriving in the United States or their destination country, or if they are being paid in advance. And last question, open question, we've talked about cyber attacks, and we have seen it in Spain. We received more than 40,000 cyber attacks last year, 52 critical attacks against state structures, that is to say 1 per week. And the origin has always been Russia. In Ecuador, we heard that there were attacks from China. China and Russia constantly. Why can we not demand responsibility, direct responsibility from these nations, and why do we not do it? Thank you very much. I will leave the floor open. Severino? Okay, in terms of Sudan, those are nationalities that have not yet been identified. Primarily, they're from the African Horn, Ethiopia, etc. They leave their countries. They arrive in Brazil. That is where they arrive. And then they will take any route they can. Ecuador, perhaps, to get to Colombia. There, they cross the jungle on foot. It may take them a long time, and it is a terrible experience. And seeing boys and girls, children, they die many times. And this is very concerning. In 2006, as Vice Minister of the government, and observing this issue in Brazil, we spoke to the Chancellor of Brazil to try to create a synergy that would allow us to work in a collaborative way on this issue. I'm talking about 2006. It has been 15 years, and this is still happening. They're aware that in Sao Paulo they are receiving these flights from Africa. And this is an issue that I don't know if there's any congressional representative from Brazil. This is something that needs follow-up. I understand, and I don't want to be negative here, but I understand that there's no visa required. So this is a topic that could contribute to the arrival of these people. Oftentimes they arrive without even a passport, without any document, and the money that they have with them, the very little amounts of money that they have, is taken by the coyotes, and they leave them abandoned in the jungle. But they come in groups, and there are certain stops between Colombia and Panama, and often they are able to make it to our border. Thank you, Severino. That methodology of not even having a passport, many times they end up sending the passport by email into Mexico, because a passport, when you're on that route as a migrant, is valuable, but it usually gets sent to them in Mexico. Certainly, go right ahead. Is this on? Yes. So, first of all, I would like to thank all of the participants of this forum. Tomorrow it will also be a very important day. It will be a long day with some very interesting topics, some very important topics. And we hope that it will improve the daily lives of our countrymen. I said in the morning, as I will say now, that we are going through complex times. We're living in societies that are facing a terrible struggle against this pandemic. But this pandemic has also shown us our weaknesses in Latin America and the Caribbean for quite a while. It's been many years that our countries have moved forward, have been developing, have grown, have advanced. There's been extraordinary work to reduce poverty, reduce hunger, to protect our environment from the ferocious appetite of some who, as the doctor said, who seek to destroy our forests, our ecosystems, our natural resources, etc., etc. And from a political and social perspective, that kind of inequality, those differences have generated struggles, I would say social struggles, citizen movements, that is, movements by the people which represent demands which they have called for, often with violence, which are never acceptable in a democratic system. But these change processes, these transformation processes in countries involve that kind of thing. In Latin America and in other countries, we're not exempt from that. I wish I could run through and visit every one of our countries. You can think, as you imagine that, what is causing these phenomena, which are not being expressed the most democratic way, the best way. Sometimes it ends up into authoritarian abuses by governments. And different from Europe, most of our governments are presidential, with an executive government that governs over the other state branches. And so when there is a restriction of freedoms, these create conflicts, authoritarianism, and this is unacceptable. Those of us who really believe in democracy are always seeking to respect those rights. But we also believe in freedom, and we believe in the sovereignty of nations. We believe in the capacity of each country to make its own decisions, of each people. In the Latin American Parliament, our colleagues from Peru are founders of this parliament. They have participated actively and suffered together with all of our countries the difficulties of being in a dictatorship, a democracy, some complex situations, others less. But there's no doubt that Peru, any external analyst will see that the process that Peru went through just now was marked by conflict. A country which in the last period has had 4 presidents? 4 presidents in a very short term of governance. But is there democracy in Peru? Are the systems still functioning? It is our goal to continue ensuring that those systems function and to guarantee that the Peruvian citizens can, as our colleague Trujillo said, that the people of Peru determine their government and their representatives. When there are difficulties, because difficulties happen, when there are certain things that seem arbitrary, which can happen, when there is fraud, because it happens, unfortunately. In many of our democracies, they still exist. Fraud still exists. And we as citizens of our own country, we must be able to uncover those frauds, to return to the institutions that exist to protect us from those frauds. And the international community must also speak to that perspective. The Latin American Parliament acts with our Congress members to arrive at an agreement. And we have been following the situation in Peru very closely as we followed the process in Ecuador, in Bolivia, as we're following the elections now in other countries, in my country, in Chile, in every country. And dear President of the Commission for Foreign Relations in Peru, let us know, together with the Peruvian Congress, what requirements would be relevant for your situation. And without a doubt, we will be at your side in your process as we have in all processes. We are not the ones who decide if there is or is not fraud, or if an electoral process which is still in process should be ended or continued. That is not our role. We understand that things have gone on for a while, but we have trust in democracy. Despite the complex situations that we're going through, democracy will continue to be stronger than those who fight it or attack it. It is the citizens that make democracy strong today. So we are at your service here. That is part of our role, part of our task. And we hope to speak with you at some point in time about that issue. With that, I would like to thank everyone. And I would like to thank Robert Pittenger for this invitation. I hope that tomorrow will be a really positive activity. Thank you. Thank you so much, President, for that final conclusion. Thank you to all 3 of us from our panel, for the closing panel for today.